Now, you had mentioned to me before about having gone through a strategic foreclosure with one of your houses, and this is something that I really don't know that much about. So I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about that and kind of how that led into your FI journey.
It sort of started back when I was a kid, really, because my parents bought their first house, I think in like 1981 or so. I was two. I don't remember that part, but we lived there for quite a while, and they bought another house and they rented out that original one that they purchased. Eventually, they actually paid it off. You know, it's been quite a number of years ago, so they paid it off and they had it as a rental home. So I always saw that as a great opportunity, and I was like, well, I want to do that too. So I got out of college, got a relatively good job. My friends were purchasing homes, so I bought a house too. Everyone will tell you it's great advice. You try to get some advice from probably the worst people to get home advice from: real estate agents and mortgage brokers. They just want you to buy something. So you got to understand people's motivation and their incentives, which don't align with your own at all. Of course, no one knew in 2005 what was coming over the next couple of years. So at the end of 2005, I purchased a home. It was probably at the height of the value ever for that neighborhood. And I bought it, and it was fine. I lived there for a few years. I eventually got married. A couple of years later, moved in with my wife in her neck of the woods there, and I rented it out, but I was unfortunately losing a few $100 each month. It was just the market price and what I had to deal with. So, of course, everyone knows 2008, and a lot of the market values dropped. This was in Atlanta, pretty decent location overall, in a neighborhood that I enjoyed. Other people actually would enjoy it as well. So over time, I was hearing about, I guess, some of the, I don't know, like the bailouts, where if it was your primary home, you would be able to like refinance and sort of make things a little bit more tolerable. Unfortunately, because it was at that point an investment property, even though it was my primary home originally under that mortgage, I knew that, number one, the house was very much upside down because I got one of those great loans where you borrow 100%, unfortunately. And yeah, it was sort of a bad situation. So I had a second mortgage. Interest rates were like more than, I mean, two and a half times what they are right now when we're recording this. And the mortgage company wouldn't work with me at all. I went back like a crazy person and read like all the closing documents and hit the area for defaulting on a mortgage and what would happen. I tried to look up what the consequence was for being in a foreclosure situation. I really couldn't find much. Going back to the incentive portion, I realized that any of the information that I found about, like, I guess, accepting a foreclosure was by lenders and other people who don't want you to foreclose. They want you to keep paying them because that's how they make their money. So it was really hard to get any information. I eventually decided, and my wife, we decided that I would let the house go into foreclosure and just deal with it. It turned out I had a pretty high credit score back then. I still do right now, over 800. And the common wisdom back then, and maybe still, I haven't looked it up, but they would say that your credit score would probably drop like hundreds of points, probably 300-400 points. It would be just awful. However, I had no debt and money in the bank and had a good job. Like, all the other markers are fine. No credit card debt, like nothing, right? So we decided to go for it, and it was fine. It's been 7 years. We just bought another house here, but that's sort of the long story to a short question, but I'm sure you have other follow-ups.
Yeah. So I was wondering, has that kind of soured you on rental properties as investments? Or do you think, is that something you would consider doing again?
Yes, it did sour me on them. Yeah, that's I think it's great for people that enjoy looking at homes and enjoy the industry, but you probably heard my just, I don't want to say anything too harsh, but I'll just say dislike for mortgage brokers and for real estate agents and like the whole industry. Just, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan at all. And some of my friends, many of my friends have rental properties. I think there's great markets for it. And if you're into dealing with all of that, then it's probably fantastic. I don't enjoy much of it. And even like even some of the folks that I dealt with more recently in this home, I didn't enjoy it very much, and I'm very much can we cuss a little bit here?
Yeah, go ahead.
And actually, it's not a cuss word, but I'm more of a ball buster, I would say, for some of the people that you would deal with. Although the real estate agent I worked with was Mindy Jensen, who is fantastic because I mean she is kind of an outsider uh, for the real estate game.
So when you bought the first house, the intention was to eventually rent it out. Was that factored in?
Yeah, that was the idea, and the plan sort of worked out because I got married a few years later, was able to move out and successfully rented it. And I learned a lot by doing that. I would be much more prepared now, but the math didn't work out when you look at what you need when you're renting out a home. Like the math just didn't work out. And I didn't research it. I didn't pay much attention. I just thought, well, my parents were able to do it. I see a few other people were able to do it. I should be able to figure it out. But the math was never going to work out the way I did it.
Yeah. So maybe a little bit more on kind of how you recovered from the foreclosure. Like, so kind of on an emotional side, was it difficult or was it kind of like, was it not too hard to go through the process? And then as well as like how to recover your credit after a foreclosure. What's your advice there?
I think it was key that I didn't have any debt. My wife and I didn't have any debt at the time, and we had, reserves out there. The other thing is I wasn't planning on borrowing any money for the foreseeable future. I have a 15-year-old truck, and I'm planning on driving it for longer. I don't drive much right now, but I had an old truck. I wasn't going to buy anything. If I was going to have to buy a car, I would just pay cash for it. So you have to be definitely in a position of, I don't know, I don't want to say power specifically, but like you can withstand and pay for things and you don't need to borrow money. Obviously, if you have to borrow money, if you're going to buy a house in the next 7 years, which will come into play soon, you have to think about that. You may not want to do that. The other portion of that is we bought a home in Montana, like within the 7 years after I had a foreclosure. For the people that don't know, if you have a foreclosure, banks won't lend you money, especially a mortgage, the same one that you defaulted on. They don't really like that. So I knew that I wasn't going to borrow any money. My wife bought the home in Montana. So we had enough money. She had a good enough job where she could just buy it in her name. So that's what we did. And it was completely fine. So I think those two areas are prerequisite, hands down. Emotionally, I treated it as a business decision because I knew when I called in to the mortgage company and tried to see if I could get any kind of break or renegotiate the interest rate or anything, they said, no, our policy is X. So that's why I went back and read the closing documents like a machine and realized, okay, if they're going to treat it like a business decision, this is the clause right here that we're dealing with. So you guys could deal with it and I will execute it as we agreed to years ago. They auctioned it off at like the courthouse, and I think I owed, say, 150, something like that, and it sold for like 100. So, I mean, it was definitely underwater, and it was a good thing to walk away from. couple things to consider. One, if that happens, right, you have to pay taxes on the difference, right? So I had to pay 50K of taxes, or sorry, I had to pay taxes on 50K because that was the difference for what it sold from. The loan was forgiven, and that was the difference. So it worked out to roughly like $18,000.
Okay.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, go that's good.
So I had to pay. So if a loan is forgiven, I'll give you another example too. If a loan's forgiven like that, you have to pay difference because it's viewed as income. So this year in 2020, the Payroll Protection Program, PPP, small businesses can qualify for that. I mentor some small businesses and entrepreneurs in a program called E for All. So I'm lightly familiar with some of the stuff out there. If a loan is forgiven, you will then have to pay taxes on the PPP. So you have to remember that. Everyone remember taxes. They're really important to pay. So you can't walk away from those, but you could walk away from a loan. Emotionally, like I said, I just treated it like a business decision, and I should have done it a couple years sooner. It was one of the best financial decisions that I made. I had $150,000 of debt, and then at the end of the day, I paid $18,000 to get rid of it via the taxes. So one of the best decisions. It's tough because it's a risk management situation. It feels wrong. I remember having a conversation with my parents. My dad kind of got it, but my mom was a little bit offended, and she was like, "Oh, you agreed to pay that money. Like, you really shouldn't do this." And, she was very unhappy with it. But again, I was acting like a machine and just like, hey, this is just a business decision, and they're not working with me. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah. No, that's a really good attitude to have towards it. I find it's kind of hard sometimes to separate. It's weird because it's so dependent on the situation. Like when it comes to spending, I feel like I'm really good from separating emotion from like the value decision and the money side of it. But even considering renting out our house now, I'm just like, oh, what if we put renters in it and they don't take care of the flowers? So it's weird how those emotional decisions can creep in and be so subtle. But yeah, that's good if you can. And maybe it helps that you had transitioned it into a rental property before.
Yeah, I totally hear you though. I mean, the emotion is hard to separate. And I think in one of our other conversations you were on my show, do you have a mortgage, or do you just invest it? Or like, there's a lot of people who would say, and if you look at the math right now, the interest rates are so low, you should probably invest it, but it does feel really good. My wife and I were just talking about it yesterday, to not have a mortgage and just know your monthly expenses are that much lower. So yeah, the emotion really, it matters a lot.
Yeah. And just to kind of recap on how to recover from a foreclosure, I like that you pointed out it's almost like selective risk taking, right? If you have one area where you have more risk or debt leverage, as long as you have slightly less risk in other areas, like you said, you didn't have any other debt, that really helps to mitigate things, right? Because then it's not just like one thing goes and then you can't afford anything else kind of problem.
The recovery. So again, I didn't care because, well, even now when I look at my credit score, I think, well, it's so silly, the components that, I mean, they have to use something, but when I look at it, I'm like, this is such a joke. So, um, as far as the impact, so I'll hit that. I knew potentially that my credit score could dip by 400 points. Most people that go into foreclosure have other issues. They're delinquent on other accounts. They have other debt. There's other problems. That's why they drop so much. Mine only dropped by 100 points, maybe 120. I don't remember exactly, but it was still over 700. So it was okay. Not great, but it was okay. And I don't even remember like monitoring it much over time, again, because it didn't actually matter to me because I wasn't going to borrow any money. And I know in the last year or so, we were looking to buy a house here in Longmont, Colorado, and it was over 800 again. So of course, over time, there's still no debt, there's more assets, and all the boxes are ticked, right? So I have pretty good credit again, excellent credit again. The tricky part, so we just purchased a home, and we sort of timed it out to end our lease, which corresponded with to roughly the same month as when the foreclosure happened, which is interesting because it's only been 7 years and a few months right now when we're recording this. So we had an offer on a place, and they wanted to move up. We gave them the date that we wanted to close on. They wanted to move it up by a few days. It was, say, 3 days under 7 years. Okay. So it was 3 days under 7 years. And then the lender that told me, he was like, we can't loan you the money because you have a foreclosure on your account, which I disclosed, right? It's one of those questions you answer. And I was like, seriously, I was like we were going to move it up in the foreclosure. I was like, check the date. When is it? And like I said, it was within 2 days. So I asked if we could just move the closing date by 2 days or 3 days, if that would be okay. And he was like, yes, which again, the lunacy of the credit score comes out with that. So 2 days before, I'm like not credit worthy. And then a couple of days later, I mean, we could pay cash for the house like that. That's how stupid it is. So anyway, again, you could tell there's a little bit of disgust for the whole industry there.
I'm glad that you bring that up. I do agree. People put too much stake in the credit score because, like you said, the rules around it are, not really straightforward. Yes, it's good to pay your bills on time and to not have too much debt. Make sure that like you're able to pay your obligations. But yeah, I never put that much stock into it because I never planned on becoming a homeowner in the first place. I was like, oh, I'll pay off the debt I have and buy stuff in cash. It's better to just have the money, right? But yeah, 800, that's a really good credit score. Like when you said it dropped to 720, I was like, oh, that's my regular credit score.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, like, when I looked up and tried to get information, there were only a few articles out there, tiny bit of information. And if you go to experts, I'm using air quotes here, about borrowing money, they would tell you, no, like that is a horrible idea to go through a foreclosure. But you really have to look at it as, I mean, it's called a strategic foreclosure. There's not a ton of information, but it was, again, one of the best financial decisions I ever made because I got rid of a bad decision for less than seeing it out for the life of the mortgage.
So there's a name for this psychology of like sunk cost. I can't remember exactly what it is, but we're more likely to like hang on to things for too long or to try to put more money in on a losing investment just because we don't want to lose what we already had. So yes. Yeah, I think that's interesting.
Sunk costs, yeah, one of my favorite biases. And if you can get past it, I mean, you make much better decisions. You have to look past the investment of time or other resources or capital or whatever it may be and look at where you are right now because you can't get back the past. You just have to look forward.
Yeah. I know you're not much of a single stock trader, but I think about it with single stocks too. Like, am I dollar cost averaging or am I chasing this sunk cost by just keep putting money on it? But
yeah.
Where can people find you online?
So here on YouTube, of course, you're watching a video right now. So I have a YouTube channel and I talk mostly about affiliate marketing and SEO, some entrepreneurship and productivity. So you could check that out. There's a ton of videos. You can also go to my blog, nichesiteproject.com, where you can sign up for the email list. I'll send you all the templates that I use to run my business for affiliate marketing. There's actually like probably dozens of resources and tons of content over there on Niche Site Project. So if you just sign up there, click the green button, enter your name and email address, you'll get all those right away. And I'll send you other emails and eventually try and sell you something. I'm an entrepreneur after all. But you can unsubscribe after you get the resources. And if you like podcasts, I have a podcast called The Doug Show. So it's at doug.show. And I'm sure, Roxanne, you'll link up for all that stuff, right?
I will. I certainly will. And thank you so much for being on the interview today. Thank you for the beer recommendation. And yeah, I'll go ahead and let you go. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.